recapping some things about the righteousness of God. Remember its equivalence to God's faithfulness, His truthfulness. We can add to that also the salvation and mercy of God. What does this mean? Scholars are not in agreement about what the precise meaning of the righteousness of God is. Here's my take on it. I believe that the righteousness of God has three senses: a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary sense: an attribute, an activity, and an attribution. Different senses to the righteousness of God depending on the context, but in this order. Primarily, the righteousness of God has to do with an attribute of God, in my opinion. This is, as we noted yesterday, coming out from the fact 3:5, 9:14, issues are raised. Paul preempts questions that would be raised by the imaginary Jewish dialogue partner or interlocutor. Is God unrighteous who brings wrath on us? 3:5. Is there unrighteousness of God? 9:14. So clearly there is a presenting question about whether God is in fact righteous. Now, no Jew would actually utter that directly, so Paul brings it out as a Socratic censurer who introduces the question, sometimes with the interlocutor, to drive them to a particular conclusion. I'll raise the questions, thank you, and I'm going to raise the questions in such a way that they lead to a specific answer. And as we move across with the questions and your answers, you're going to get to the end point where I want you to get to. Okay? So Paul himself, he knows that the interlocutor is working with the issue, the interlocutor he himself has constructed, which will also speak to the audience. Romans is like a layered trap in which the first trap is set for the imaginary Jewish dialogue partner, but it's a layered trap in the sense that that's an imaginary interlocutor. It's designed, like diatribe is designed generally, to indirectly address the concerns of your audience, attack directly the imaginary interlocutor so you don't offend directly your audience, but your audience should pick up that this has relevance for them. In this case, the issues over which God might be charged with unrighteous is a law-free gospel leading to unethical behavior, a moral vacuum, and the condition of Israel, who has not generally accepted the gospel. What is God? How can God be a faithful God? How can He be a righteous of God if most of Israel is going to hell? Okay, so that Paul surfaces the question, makes it direct, and it gives us an indication that the righteousness of God is primarily addressing something about God's character. That God actually shows Himself to be righteous or in the right by fulfilling the promises that He makes to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saving, however, in an unexpected way, apart from the law of Moses, and on the basis of faith in Jesus Christ. I think that is the primary sense of the righteousness of God. The secondary and still very important sense has to do with activity. And we'll see this is sort of a dominant meaning coming out in the Psalms and 2nd Isaiah, where righteousness is the righteousness of God is a virtual synonym for God's salvation. Almost plug in soteria instead of dikaiosune, the Greek words, and come up with essentially a similar meaning. That is the righteous activity that flows from God's righteous character. God is righteous and must show Himself to be righteous. The two are inextricably intertwined. And finally, righteousness of God as an attribution. That is God's attributed righteousness. The righteousness that He imputes to others when they believe in the gospel. The righteousness that is Christ's own that gets imputed to believers. That is not something endemic to them, but something they get as a result of being incorporated into Christ, who becomes their righteousness. In a sense, we're talking about here the righteousness of God in the sense of the righteousness from God. And that expression, the righteousness from God, actually does occur in Philippians 3:9. He uses the explicit preposition ek, followed by the genitive. So the question is raised then, when he doesn't use the preposition ek, followed by the genitive, meaning from, and he just has a genitive, does he also mean from? Well, I think not in most of the texts that we're going to look at in Paul, but I don't think it completely eliminate the sense of from. I think this is a residual sense that comes out of the fact that God is righteous. He acts in righteousness. How does He act in righteousness? By saving those who believe in Christ. But what is the means by which God saves? He imputes his righteousness of Christ onto those who believe, who don't have a natural righteousness of their own. All these are closely interconnected. I used to go with one or the other, and then I said, I can't really eliminate any of these senses. They seem to overlap in a series of graded significance within the text of Romans, where I think we're working with a primary, secondary, and tertiary sense. Some texts like Isaiah 46, I have brought near my righteousness. I will not be slow with the salvation which is from me. What's parallel there? Salvation is parallel to righteousness. And the context is that of the impending deliverance of Jews from exile in Babylon through the conquest of the Persian Cyrus. Isaiah 51, a law will go out from me and my justice for a light to the nations. See, this is the kind of text that Paul would have been attracted to. I will bring near my righteousness swiftly, and my salvation shall go out. And in my arm shall the Gentiles hope. My righteousness shall not fail. My righteousness will be forever, and my salvation to all generations. Again, see the parallelism there. Isaiah 56:1. My salvation is on the point of coming, and my mercy, which in Greek says mercy, eleos, but Hebrew, it's tzidkathi, which is everywhere else rendered in the Septuagint as my righteousness, is on the point of being revealed. That's a particularly important text because the propositio or thesis statement in Romans 1 talks about in the gospel the righteousness of God is being revealed. You see the connection with the verb here. Psalm 98, the Lord has made known his salvation. He revealed his righteousness in the sight of the nations. See, all this stuff with the nations coming in with these texts. And the Gentiles, same word in Greek, right? Tai ethne. He has remembered his mercy, Greek eleos, Hebrew hesed, steadfast and loving kindness, and his truthfulness. So we bring up that element now. Or faithfulness, Greek aletheia, Hebrew emunah, to the house of Israel. All the ends of the earth have seen the salvation of our God. The Lord will judge the world in righteousness. Sort of a judgment there, sort of the underbelly of it. But most of the thrust of the righteousness of God is a positive salvific term. God bringing the salvation that he promised from of old. Here, a very important text because Paul explicitly cites from it in both Romans 3 and in Galatians 3. Paul no doubt definitely made use of this. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Give ear to my supplications in your faithfulness. The Greek there is aletheia, but the Hebrew emunah. You could render it from the Greek truthfulness. Answer me, in your righteousness, sadeka. Do not enter into judgment with your servant, for, and here's the text that Paul cites, no living being will be justified in your sight. Paul adds in both the Galatians 3 text and the Romans 3 text on the basis of the works of the law. For your name's sake, O Lord, preserve my life. In your righteousness, bring me out of trouble. In your mercy, destroy all those who afflict my life. So the psalmist appealing to God's righteousness is the psalmist appealing to what? God's faithfulness, and later, mercy. And again, from the Greek, you would render truthfulness. All these things are closely aligned with one another, all coordinate together as being parallel. So you have this issue of God's attribute, his faithfulness or activity, the salvation that arises from his faithfulness.